Hey all, my name is Chris. Those of you from the WorldWorks Games forums will know me better as Shattered Dragon. I've decided to start a series of vids on how to reinforce your cardstock models to add weight and durability, without going to the extremes I have with Mapboard in the past. Here before you we have a collection of some of the tools that you'll probably need, including of course glue, uh, cutting and scoring tools. Uh, Scoring tools are important, especially if you choose not to use a knife to score. Appropriate markers for edging as well. In this case, I highly recommend, in addition to your rulers, if you can't find a nice big metal one like mine, get yourself a plastic square for doing various and different projects, especially when you have to square things off. Um, Now, I will just quickly set up here. This shouldn't take a moment. The squares are probably the last thing I'm going to need. Now, we will start off with castles and keeps at this moment. Here before you, you see three basic risers. Now, looking at them from the camera's angle, you don't really see too much different. This first one here I did with Mapboard. Now, as you can see, we've suffered some warping over time. I cannot fix this really easily without risking popping all the glue seams. This piece may end up being scrapped in the long run. Now, one of the things I did to ensure this wouldn't happen again was... Oop, wrong piece. That's an older one. Here we go. I glued cardstock to the inside. It prevented the glue from warping. As you can see, the sides stayed much straighter. The problem is I ended up with a very hollow box. This is my old character, by the way, a wizard, I believe. When you stack these, the problem is that they end up with hollow edges, and if you want to put them, say, on a corner, somehow, it's not possible here, they don't sit on top. They fall open. I began to dislike this method as it turned out to be very problematic. So I decided to try to fix it by giving the regular cardstock versions bottoms. In this case, I have used a cardstock bottom. I measured the top, cut a piece for the bottom the exact same way, only instead of cutting out the square, I tabbed it, scored it, and glued it into place. I don't know how visible this is on the camera, but my top bows. It looks like a bubble, and it does not sit flat on the table surface because the bottom bubbles too. It is moderately usable, but one of the things I really don't like about paper models is that when you start stacking heavier things on them, in this case I'll use a couple of large horses. Believe it or not, I guess you can't really see that, but the entire structure has begun to sink. So if I actually place a giant miniature on that, the horses are not actually giant, I end up with collapsing cardstock. You can actually see it reinflate right there when I took them off. Nothing I have tried has fixed this. It is an unfortunate problem. So I decided to try building one of Denny's like normal. This is one of the original Caveworks risers, assembled like cardstock, hollow bottom. And I still have issues. The sides bow out. You can sort of see it here that it is not sitting flat. As well, again, we still have the soft top issue. Really soft. Now, in this case, what I would do is I would take my pre-cut piece of Mapboard, which I have apparently lost. There we go. And it doesn't matter what you use, something firm, durable. It can be foam core, Mapboard. You can go out and get balsa wood. Simple method, of course, is just to apply glue around the outside edges. You do want to make sure you at least get the outside edges all completely. This will ensure that no matter what, the piece won't pop off inside. And at the very minimum, you want an X across the middle. Me personally, I'm a little bit of a heavier glue user. Now, the way I found out the measurement for this was I measured the top. In this case, my piece is not exactly fit. Now, normally I would do it exactly perfect. It's my method of dealing with stuff. But you place it inside and you push it down. Now, this piece does not fit tightly to the edge. I don't know if you can see the little gaps there along the edge. It should be clear on the video. But for the top piece, it doesn't really have to fit perfectly. Normally, I'm a much more accurate measurer, and I fit it and then cut it again if it doesn't fit right. You always want to pre-fit before you glue, because if you don't, it will not stay in right. It'll push out the sides, it'll warp the piece. Now, what this has done is gotten rid of that top bow problem. The top is now a firm, hard surface. So we'll just hold this a moment more to make sure that it dries, pushing it down on all edges. Now, as you can see, unfortunately, the bottom's still all warpy. But I like to stack things on things, and so I want to find a way around that. Well, in this case, what you do is you grab another piece of mat board. Now, I use scrap in general for stuff like this. I already made sure this edge was square, but for yourselves, if you're not sure, take the little plastic square, line it up with the corners, and you should find whether or not your piece is square. In this case, I have exactly what I need. So this will be the main corner I measure and cut off of. Now, the very first thing I want to do is figure out what the overall width from either side on the 3-inch length is. In my case, I have two different rulers. I've worn out the numbers and lines on my cutting ruler, so I use a clear ruler because I can place it over things and see through it. You find these very helpful in the long run. Simple recommendation: always put your glue sticks away. I have a bad habit of leaving mine out. Now, because the edges are warped, as you can see here, you want to find out what it is, use it and push it in, lining up. The first line you want to do, now I've got an exact 3 inches here. If I turn it around and measure the other side, I've again got an exact 3 inches. Now, this is keeping in mind that inside will be a little bit narrower, but for my purposes, 3 inches should be able to do it. A trick I use to make marks, especially in stuff like this, is rather than go with a pen or pencil, I use either the blade, or this is especially useful in reverse scoring, is a pointed, narrow, sharp tool, because when you apply it to the paper, you can just push it right through where the reverse scoring marks are and then line up on the back. This tool is also very, very useful for scoring if you drag it backwards along your piece this way. Now, back to marking. 3 inches is simple enough. I've got my square corner over here, so I'll be measuring off of that. I prefer to over measure, so you'll always want to double check your measurements if you do this. So 1 obviously turns into 4. Now, because I know there's some cardstock, I'm going to take off a very little tiny bit of the measurement. I'm not talking like a 1/16 of an inch, I'm talking about the thickness of paper. And about 3-4 inches down, you want to do another one. Since I'm doing a 5-inch long piece, that'll be more than enough. Again, I can see through the ruler, so I can line this side up pretty easily, and I make my second 3-inch mark. Back a little bit so that I have some room to maneuver with. Now, take the piece. You'll need a much more durable knife if you're using cardstock, or if you're using mat board or foam core or balsa wood, apologies. And then line up your cut marks where you set them, making sure you're nice and straight. Now, I don't have to worry about my ruler slipping because I glued some sandpaper onto the back of it, which allows it to stay nice and straight. Unfortunately, I still have to make an average of 3 or 4 passes to ensure that the piece comes off. Foam core, you have to cut through the top layer, then the middle section, and then the bottom layer, from what I've heard from everybody else. Now, this gives me a nice perfect width. If I take the piece and actually put it on this, you can see clearly it fits inside. So I probably won't need to do much more adjusting, but I am noticing something here. When I do my test fit, this is not exact. I end up with a little bubble. Now, this is not what you want. This means that this piece is no longer functional for this, but this is still scrap, and I will probably use it again later. This means that the piece I'm going to have to measure is probably going to have to be an exact 3 inches. So, knowing that I have kind of screwed up, we will take another piece of scrap, quickly find a clean edge. Now in this case, I'm pretty sure this edge isn't square. This is where my metal ruler comes in handy. If you don't have a metal ruler, line up your plastic square. Yeah, see, this is really bad. Line up your plastic square and do it that way. So in this case, I don't need a piece too long, so I'm going to go quickly cut this down to what I need. Now again, you don't have to be exact when you're doing stuff like this. This piece is really warpy, or I would be doing this a little different, but it's best to use scrap for this. Don't worry about having little scrap. You can use that for a variety of other things later on. Now, I need a square edge. Obviously, I don't have one. This is a much better way. This is not square. So to quickly square it off, I make sure I have at least one good flat edge. Yep. I'll flip this over. Don't mind the writing on it. I actually use this to jot down a song I made up once. I've got a nice square edge here. Cut it off. Now, I don't like using this to do much more than mark it because it slips. So line it up and cut. Now again, I said 3 inches before. This makes, I believe, this is my square edge. Now if you're unsure and you don't want to screw it up later, what you can do is you can take the piece, okay, that's my square edge, and you can just take one of your markers, doesn't matter which one, and make an arrow in the corner pointing to the square corner that you're going to mark it on. Just slight helpful hints. None of this will be visible. I will preferably be using this black side on the bottom, but you can use the white side, remembering that this is going to be placed on other things. So what it looks like is not necessarily important. Now, 3 inches off of my square side. I know this is my square corner. I'll do this right this time. Hopefully the piece will fit. And a quick 3 inches back. Line it up, make your mark. Move it down about 4 inches, line it up, make your mark. Now then, take your cutting ruler again, line up the marks, and cut. Now, I heard both of the notches get hit by the knife, so I know I'm pretty dead on. Now hopefully this time I got what I was looking for. It's a nice square little piece that'll fit inside of here properly. That's a much better fit. Now when this is glued, it will actually hold. A quick double check to make sure that it'll still fit on the other side before you do any more. Perfect. Now my overall length is a little different. Unfortunately, these pieces don't actually turn out to be 5 inches long. It may be my printer settings, it may be something else. So I take the piece and I measure it. Now the reason I'm hovering my ruler here is because what you want to do is you want to have the measurement of the bottom, not the top, which won't be necessarily the same. Okay, in this case I've got 4 inches and 15/16, and in this case I've got 4 inches and 15/16. Now remember, it's actually better, and I forgot this, to cut appropriately to size. You see, this is obviously just a scrap piece, as I've got some worn corner here. Fortunately, that's on the far side from where I want to do what I want to do. Now lining up your ruler again, make the appropriate marks to cut off the piece. Now, I know this all seems complicated, but when I'm just sitting here doing this without giving out instructions, it all runs pretty smoothly. So again, we go to 4 and 15/16. Lining up the ruler again, 4 and 15/16. Now you can double check your measurements if you're unsure. I'm pretty sure I'm sure, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. Line up your ruler, take your knife, cut it off. Now obviously the sides of this are too narrow to hold it inside of the